I'm Felicity Hanna with the story of how our investigations team have traced money tainted by an international bribery scandal through a complex web of trusts and offshore companies to the UK high street. Our story starts late at night in Libya.
Well, 11 o'clock at night, outside of a coffee house in Tripoli, pitch black out. He got into my vehicle, and then that's when he handed me the documents, and he was pretty excited to be able to give these to me. It was something like out of a movie, more or less, that you would see, I guess.
There's a link connecting bribes like this one in 2009 to investments into property on the British high street. We're finding out about this link for the very first time, thanks to the Pandora Papers, a leak of almost 12 million documents and files exposing the secret wealth and dealings of the super-rich. The data, obtained by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists in Washington, D.C., has led to one of the biggest ever global investigations. Out of 12 million documents and files, we've chosen to follow a trail via Monaco and the Middle East that shows how money has been laundered through UK property, corrupting and distorting the market for everyone else.
Born and raised in Canada, of course, by good Scottish parents, and born and raised in the oil industry. It was ingrained to us. I started in the oil industry as a young guy at 17, moved my way self up the ladder, from being a roughneck on the rigs to drilling fluid engineering, and then moved into sales and management along the way.
Lindsay Mitchell has spent his career travelling the world and working in the petroleum sector, following in his father's footsteps. He's an oil man through and through. One of his promotions led him into a situation he hadn't ever expected, and that story begins with this clandestine meeting under a Libyan night sky.
I was well connected with some of the regime, and there was a tender upcoming for a $45 million environmental cleanup, we call it, in Libya, and the gentleman who was in charge of that, I knew very well.
Lindsay is troubled. You can hear it in his voice, the occasional giveaway stumble. He's troubled because of what he did while working for a company called Unaoil back in 2009. Officially, Unaoil's business was working as an intermediary, helping international firms, especially oil companies, negotiate deals in countries including Libya, Iraq, and Iran. In 2016, leaked emails published by Australia's Fairfax Media revealed that Unaoil had used bribes to achieve some of those deals. Vast bribes at times. The UK investigation alone uncovered $17 million in bribes paid to win contracts worth $1.7 billion in Iraq. But for Lindsay, this was a first.
He made mention that if we're successful to win that tender, him and his fellow cohorts would be expecting at least 5 or 10% of the award of that contract.
What were you thinking when you saw the documents that he was prepared to give you?
I was very uneasy, very uneasy.
So Lindsay's contact was expecting money, something up front and a bigger bite in the future. He contacted Unaoil the following day, and from there, things happened very quickly.
It was probably about 3 or 4 hours later that this gentleman from the Unaoil group handed me an envelope at the staff house in Tripoli. It was open, took a little brief look inside, it's thick. I didn't sit there and count the dollars, okay? I knew it was quite substantial. I've always given it a range of 10,000 US or better, and then it was up to me to deliver the envelope to this gentleman.
For Lindsay Mitchell, handing over that envelope was the last meeting he had as a Unaoil employee.
It didn't hit me until after I'd left, and then I thought about my family, how I brought them up and how they should conduct themselves and so on. And the guilt just got to me. And about 10 o'clock the next morning, I just decided that was it. I can't do this. I went and booked a flight back to Canada and sent in my resignation and flew home.
He kept quiet about what happened that night for years, right up to 2016, when leaked emails revealed the extent of Unaoil's actions. It hit the headlines, and his former colleagues began going to prison.
A Monaco-based energy services company, Unaoil, is at the centre of major bribery and corruption allegations.
Monaco raiding the offices of a little-known company called Unaoil. That raid making international headlines, however, because it comes after a major...
I was in Iraq in my apartment and actually saw the story on Twitter. When I started getting a better understanding on how many emails that they actually had at hand, I was quite concerned that my name would actually come up in those emails, and which it did. So I cooperated with the authorities. If I wouldn't have stepped up to the plate and spoke with the authorities, I could be one of the fall guys as well.
Did you personally benefit from handing over that envelope of cash?
No, personally, I think I did a lot of damage career-wise when I admitted to what I'd done. But that's okay. My personal situation, and it's okay.
By getting out early and sharing information with the authorities, Lindsay hopes he's avoided prosecution. But 4 people are in prison in the UK, and 2 members of the family behind Unaoil, the Assanis, are awaiting sentencing in the US. Lawyers acting for them dispute Lindsay Mitchell's bribery story, saying it wasn't done under the direction of anyone from Unaoil. But this is a company that imploded in what's been called one of the world's biggest bribe scandals, and implicated a lot of multinationals into the storm, including household names like Rolls-Royce and Samsung. And at the heart of Unaoil was a family, Atta Assani and 2 of his sons, Saman and Cyrus. So this is a good time to learn more about those 3 men, because this is key to the trail of money we're about to follow. Although they ran an international business from Monaco, they kept a relatively low profile compared to some of the super rich who live there.
They didn't give you that dirty business type atmosphere.
Were they flash people?
No, they didn't wear Rolexes and they didn't have a lot of flash. They were pretty humble people in that way. I don't think they didn't want to attract any attention to themselves, and when you have money, you don't have to flash it.
We heard that the sons Cyrus and Saman would occasionally visit a place in Monaco called Stars and Bars.
The elite of Monte Carlo, they all knew each other, and I would say the Assanis were part of that elite group.
Hello, welcome to Stars and Bars.
Bonjour, bonjour. Je voudrais une Coke, s'il vous plaît.
Coca-Cola?
Oui.
Producer Anna Meisel and I travelled to Monaco to find out more about the family, and we met Mark Desani, a local journalist who's spent decades in and around the area. He's been following the Unaoil story and the players involved for years. And where better to meet than the Assanis' former haunt?
They were great networkers. They're a classic Monaco family in that they fit the glamorous image of the place. I mean, Atta's a very distinguished-looking man, and Cyrus, he was more of the socialite, dare I say, even playboy of the family.
What were their roles in Unaoil?
Well, Atta, the father and the founder of Unaoil, he is very much the brains and the founder of the company. Then Cyrus, perhaps the more outgoing of the 2 brothers, was very much the fixer and the man who put all the deals together, and was probably more forward than his brother Saman, who was Oxford educated and obviously very much a key member of the business as well, but perhaps more involved on the administrative side. But they worked very much as a team, and they were a very close family, very fond of each other as well.
I'm just walking down this very busy Monaco street because there's a carpet shop just around the corner. It's a Persian carpet shop, and I've had a tip-off that the owner might know the Assani family. So I'm going to go and see if he'll talk to us. Bonjour.
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 Okay, bonjour. Nice to meet you.
Nice to
Welcome
meet you.
to Monaco. Welcome to Gallery Mogadam.
Alexander Mogadam was very keen to talk, especially about his carpets.
Oh, it's
This is
beautiful.
to make this carpet, the weaver lost even us sometime because it's so difficult. One every knot, and this costs 500,000 euro.
This is 500,000 euro.
What is it?
You're standing on it. You're standing on a 500,000 euro.
You can walk on it. 500. Come walk on it.
I'm not walking on a 500,000 euro carpet.
I asked how he'd first met the Assanis.
They came to buy carpets. Yes.
And were they buying top-of-the-range carpets, or did they have money to spend?
He was very modest. He bought something about 10,000, 20,000. That's it. Not very much. I told him, listen, I thought you are a rich family. Come and buy some rum. He's very modest. We become friends. All in all, we are still in contact.
Did Atta ever mention how he felt about the case against him and his sons?
Recently, every time I see him, he said, everything is settled, everything is done. I said, Atta, I don't need to know. You are my friend. We go for dinner, we go for lunch.
The untroubled days spent in their Monaco offices or visiting stars and bars are over. Since then, Cyrus and Saman Asani have pleaded guilty for their roles in a scheme to corruptly facilitate millions of dollars in bribe payments to officials in multiple countries. They're waiting to be sentenced by the American courts. We know that Atta Asani was the chair and founder of a company that was winning lucrative contracts through bribery. But he hasn't been convicted of anything. His lawyers insist it would be wrong to suggest that his assets are the proceeds of crime. They added that, despite lengthy investigations by the Serious Fraud Office and the US Department of Justice, there's been no finding that all monies generated by Unaoil are the proceeds of crime. We have been told that Atta Asani cut a deal and paid around $2 million as part of a non-prosecution agreement with the US Department of Justice. His lawyers state it's misleading to suggest anyone can pay a sum of money to receive a non-prosecution agreement. So that's what's happened so far. Now, for the first time, thanks to a major new leak of confidential documents, including from an offshore services provider called Trident Trust, we can find out more about where some of the proceeds of Unaoil ended up. Trident Trust serves a lot of international businesses, providing administration services for corporations, trusts, and family offices. This leak has exposed some of its most secretive clients. By piecing together evidence found in the leaked documents, we can trace how some of Atta Asani's Unaoil earnings ended up being sent into Britain and used to invest in property. And when money tainted by criminal activity is funneled into legitimate businesses, there's a name for that.
Well, based on all of the evidence you've put in front of me, I would call it money laundering.
This is Graham Barrow. He's a financial crime expert. He works with banks to help them reduce the risk that they'll be used for money laundering. The documents we've seen reveal that companies owned by Atta Asani and administered by Trident Trust in the British Virgin Islands invested at least £7.5 million, that's just over $10 million, into two funds in yet another offshore jurisdiction, the Cayman Islands. The source of those funds is listed as earnings of Mr. Asani by Unaoil Group, and now we also know where the money went. Looking at the evidence from the various documents we've seen, we know that Atta Asani's money ended up in property across the UK.
Property is extraordinarily attractive because ultimately corrupt and criminal enterprises want safe homes for their money. There is an irony there, isn't it, that people who live in corrupt countries won't leave their money in those corrupt countries because other people in those countries are also corrupt. So they want a safe haven, and the UK is a huge safe haven, and that's why it's extremely attractive. But we also need to bear in mind that that money's come from somewhere, and almost always it's come from innocent people who are either buying products or paying taxes or whatever, and are not getting the benefit of that money. And it's also distorting our own property market, and that drives up property prices to a degree where ordinary people can no longer afford to live in certain parts of the country. I mean, it matters intensely.
Let's quickly check in with Trident Trust here. After all, they are one of the firms whose documents have been leaked and revealed where some of Atta Asani's Unaoil money has gone. A spokesperson told us they don't discuss their clients with the media. They said each of Trident's trust and corporate businesses is regulated in the jurisdiction in which it operates and is fully committed to compliance with all applicable regulations. Trident routinely cooperates with any competent authority which requests information. Back to London, because it's time to meet Atta's third son, his youngest, Sasan. He lives in London, and he's not been involved in the family business. At least, not directly.
Yeah, hi there, I'm Sasan Asani, Managing Director at LRE Capital.
Instead of oil, he's in property, and he's had a couple of different enterprises over the years. LRE Capital Limited is his current business. Before that, he ran a similar-sounding company, Lumina Real Estate Capital Limited. These companies didn't actually own or invest in any property. Instead, the family's lawyers told us these businesses simply advised the people with the money, large funds. LRE Capital's role is to help with things like development opportunities and leasing, they say. But very interestingly, two of the major funds that Lumina Real Estate Capital and Sasan Asani advised are quite familiar. They're the two Cayman Island funds that received that £7.5 million from Sassan's dad, Atta. Here's Sassan talking to the BBC back in 2017.
We're a UK-focused real estate investment fund, and we target various parts of the country where we see that, which are sort of open to benefiting from capital expenditure and reinvestment, and try and ultimately, I suppose, provide workplaces and living spaces for people for the long term.
But as we've unpicked the layers of corporate structures, we've also discovered that Sassan Hassani had an additional important role in running the administration of the funds. He was one of the directors of what's known as the general partner. That's the corporate entity that effectively runs the funds. And these funds were far larger than just Atta's $7.5 million. Lawyers for the family told us that Atta's money represented just 5.6% of the two funds, so other investors were involved.
Turn left onto Baffin Way, then turn right onto Ayfield View.
In 2014, one of the funds paid millions to acquire the Humber Enterprise Park, just outside of Hull in the north of England. A firm called Cityvale acted as consultant and asset manager for the project. With big plans for inward investment to the region, the park opened with a big celebration. It made the local news. Sassan was there and even got chatting to this BBC Humberside reporter on the day.
So you've helped put the cash into this, really. So as someone living in the area, can I just say thanks? Thanks for giving us your money. Appreciate it.
It was an exciting day, a big event. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, came.
His Royal Highness was asking whether or not we were the go-to people for these types of projects. And, I'm not one to brag, so I said, well, we're quite good at this sort of thing. And then he said, well, you've missed an open goal. You should have said yes. So that's what all the chuckles were about.
Well, you made him laugh. He really found it funny.
No, indeed, he did. And it was a real honour to have met him.
Hello. We've got a meeting with Deering Plastics.
We went to take a look and meet one of the park's tenants. And it is important to understand that this place matters to the Hull area. The government wanted to keep jobs in the area, so it turned it into an enterprise zone, providing tax breaks that made it appealing for businesses to move to, and so also pretty attractive to investors like those Cayman Island funds that Sassan was involved in.
Good morning, Andy. Thank you very much for getting us in.
This is Andy Harris, the boss of Deering Plastics, which rents a large unit in the park. He gave us the tour of his plastic injection moulding factory, and it was brilliant. A huge room of machines with very familiar products rolling off the conveyor belts.
Oh, it's a first aid box.
Yeah,
I've got this. I think I've got this exact box in my kitchen.
Plastic beads go in one end of the robots, and moments later the products fall out the other end. Honestly, I could have watched it all day. But instead, we went somewhere a bit quieter. It was time to tell him what we'd discovered.
So we're particularly interested in LRE. We've obtained evidence that some of the money invested in this development could have stemmed from bribery and corruption. We're talking relatively small amounts, but still, dirty money could therefore have been laundered through some of this business park. As somebody who's such a part of the community here, I want to ask how that makes you feel.
Well, we would have turned our back on the site immediately had we been made aware of that. We work for some very, very credible global businesses, and we would not support any such actions whatsoever.
Andy, can I say, you sound very measured, but you do look quite angry. Does it cause you concerns for your own business?
It certainly does cause any business concerns. I mean, you can't quite sense how I'm shaking a little bit with it because
no, I can see that you are slightly shaking.
Yeah,
actually.
I'm thinking, well, that is a shock because we are a long-established business of 37 years and we would not ever flaunt any of the laws. We've got 50 people out there that rely on our business, so we cannot at any stage support any wrongdoing. Because if it reflects on our business and it's detrimental to our business, then a lot of people are going to suffer.
You might be thinking Atta Hassani's $7.5 million was fairly small in the grand scheme of things, and if it was just 5.6% of the total fund, then does it really matter? I put that to Graham. And he said that's the whole point of it.
One of the things that people seek to do with dirty money is to blend it with clean money. It makes it so much harder to find it. It makes it so much harder to recover. So it's absolutely the goal to mix it with legitimate money and make the problem of extracting it again difficult to the point of impossibility.
LRE Capital isn't associated with the Humber Enterprise Park anymore. In 2019, the partnership with Cityvale, the asset manager for the park, came to an end. A spokesperson for Cityvale told us that the company complied fully with legal and regulatory obligations. It said the regulated fund administrator conducted due diligence on the limited partners in the fund. That's the investors. So what about Sasan Asani, who was on the board of the body that was effectively running the funds? We asked Sarah George, a partner at the law firm Sidley and a former prosecutor for the Financial Services Authority, who exactly could be committing an offence when tainted money comes into the UK.
It's the person who enters into the arrangement or facilitates the acquisition, retention, use or control of the criminal property. So if you are an investor, if you are the person who owns the funds and transmits the funds, if you are a lawyer who papers the contracts, any of those people commit an offence of money laundering.
Do they have to know that what they're doing is money laundering for that to be that offence?
Know or suspect. So the test is rather lower than knowing. It's merely suspecting is enough.
Lawyers for Sasan Asani insist he had no reason to suspect that Unaoil was involved in any wrongdoing, and only found out what Unaoil had been up to when everyone else did in 2016. They said he's never been involved in laundering the proceeds of crime. They added that Atta Asani's last investment was made in 2013, a full 3 years before the Unaoil allegations came to light. And they say that as soon as the allegations came out, every step was taken to comply with legal and regulatory requirements. At that point, the companies owned by Atta Asani were removed as investors in the funds, and then Sasan resigned from the boards of the two funds at the same time. Atta Asani is no longer a beneficial owner of any fund asset. Humber Enterprise Park wasn't the only location linked to Atta Asani's money. The funds also bought into property in London, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and they still own some, including a cinema complex on a high street in the northeast of England. At the moment, the UK is still potentially open to corrupt cash. A report published last year by the UK government warned that its property market is high risk for money laundering because large amounts of cash can be invested, but there are low levels of transparency. In fact, the risk has actually increased in recent years because there's so much more money coming in from overseas, and there are limits on how much resource can be spent investigating. There is one possible solution to try to address how some money launderers operate. Here's Graham with an idea to counter the risk of money laundering where an overseas company buys a property outright.
Ultimately, you should be required to provide documentary evidence of not just the name of the company, but the people who sit behind and own that company, and that should be verified evidence. I'm not going to say it's going to get rid of the problem, but we need to think about what hurdles we can put in place that make it harder and harder and harder to introduce money into the system and get long-term benefit from it.
The government says it is on board with the idea of a register. A spokesperson told us people should not be able to profit from dirty money, and that the government will establish a new register of overseas entities owning UK property to combat money laundering and increase transparency in the UK property market. The thing is, that register was first proposed back in 2015, and it's still not happened. Among the many stories to emerge from the Pandora Papers, we've been able to examine one particular trail of money involving one particular company and a relatively small proportion of its earnings. We simply don't know exactly how much tainted money comes into the UK or the full extent that has on the lives of people here. Lindsay Mitchell, who we heard from at the start of our story, says getting international oil companies to pay equal wages to workers could break the chain of corruption at the very start.
I think it matters that people get an understanding how it works in when the international oil companies go into these countries. When a expat is working for the international oil company and he's making $1,500 a day, and his national that has this better qualifications, some of them, highly educated, been doing the job for a number of years, good experience, and he knows his job, and he's getting $1,500 a month. And he's working 6 days a week, and that to me has always sat wrong. The international companies should have some type of setup where those people are being paid probably not equal, but pretty darn close, so that they don't have to worry about having corruption within their groups.
We'll leave the final word about the wider problem of money laundering in the UK to Graham Barrow.
This money coming in, it distorts the economy. And it distorts it for a number of reasons. One is the people investing are not so bothered about getting the best price, so they're quite happy to pay whatever's being asked. And that has an effect on the property values, particularly property values. And that can start bleeding through to ordinary people finding it difficult to buy property in certain locations. So it has profound effects on local economies, and those effects bleed through to ordinary human beings like you and me and others, and have a real-world impact on them.
That's all from this edition of Assignment with me, Felicity Hannah.